The cauldron had been burning for 11 hours when Lieutenant Commander Sarah Voss finally understood what she had made. She stood at the viewport of Laboratory Ring 7, hands pressed flat against the cold polymer glass, and watched the thing below move for the first time. Not the jerking, hydraulic twitch of a test cycle, not the pre-programmed reflex arc that engineers use to check joint tolerances. This was something else. A slow, deliberate turning of the head, as if the creature in the vat below was listening to a sound no instrument in the ring could detect, as if it was hearing itself think. Voss had not slept in 41 hours. She knew because she had been counting. The hegemony fleet was 3 days out from the Kepler transit point, and Command had given her department exactly the time between now and their arrival to produce something that could stop them. Something that was not a ship, not a weapon in any conventional sense. Not a soldier or a drone or a countermeasure. Something unprecedented. She had produced something unprecedented. She pulled her hand from the glass and looked at her palm. The condensation had left a perfect outline of 5 fingers. She stared at it too long, then she keyed her earpiece. Harlan. Come to the viewport. A pause. The shuffle of a man who had also not slept. Dr. Harlan Metz appeared beside her a minute later, still pulling on his coat. He looked down through the glass and said nothing for a long moment. It's moving, he said. Yes. That's not the test protocol. No. Metz pressed his own hands to the glass. His knuckles went white. Below them, in the amber fluid of the regeneration vat, the thing that had been assembled over 3 months from stolen hegemony biodata and 11 years of failed human attempts at synthetic life, turned its head a second time. Slowly, searching. Sarah, Metz said quietly. What did we do? She didn't answer. She was already walking to the stairs. The hegemony called themselves the Unbroken, which was not a boast. It was a biological description. Their cellular architecture did not permit the accumulation of damage the way human tissue did. A hegemony soldier who lost 3 limbs in combat would simply, over the course of 6 weeks, grow them back. Their command structure, their war doctrine, their entire civilization was built on this fact. They did not break. They adapted, and they continued. Humanity, they had announced at first contact 14 years ago, was an interesting anomaly, a species that had achieved spaceflight without the biological infrastructure to survive it. They had given Earth 18 months to demonstrate some useful quality that might justify continued existence. Earth had spent 16 of those months arguing about the terms of the assessment, and the last 2 producing Sarah Voss's laboratory. Voss was 38 years old. She had a doctorate in xenosynthetic biology and a secondary degree in applied ethics that she had mostly stopped thinking about around month 7 of the project. She was from a small town in the Canadian interior where her mother had grown mushrooms commercially and her father had taught secondary school mathematics. And she sometimes thought that both of those things, the patient cultivation, the rigorous structure, had more to do with her work than any of her formal training. She had grown up believing the universe was probably full of life. She had been right, and she had spent the years since wishing she hadn't been. She took the stairs to the vat level 2 at a time. The laboratory was quiet this late. Most of the team were sleeping in rotation, command's orders, because they needed functional minds in 3 days, and sleep-deprived researchers made mistakes. The skeleton crew on the vat level were 2 technicians named Osei and Pahlavi, both of whom looked up when Voss pushed through the door, and then looked back down at their screens in the specific way of people who had just seen something they were not going to acknowledge. The vat itself was 8 meters in diameter. The amber fluid, an electrolytic bath of synthesized proteins and conductant medium, was lit from below by heating elements which gave the whole chamber an orange glow that Metz had once called, without meaning to be funny, very biblical. The creature stood in the center of it. It was approximately 2 meters tall. Its surface was not quite skin, not the wet, unmade look of early-stage synthesis, but something between skin and the exterior membrane of a hegemony soldier, which had been the point. Every major system in its body had been built from a template drawn from the hegemony's own biology. Immune cascade, nervous architecture, cellular regeneration, the entire package. The thing that made them unbreakable, grafted onto a frame that was, structurally, recognizably human. The frame had been the hardest part. Voss had argued for it from the beginning, when Command's first instinct had been to build something more alien, something that would scare them, something that looked like a weapon. She had argued for the human frame for 18 months, through 6 committee reviews, through 2 complete redesigns, through a funding freeze that had lasted 4 months. She had argued because she understood something that the generals did not, that the hegemony's assessment was not about military capacity, it was about worth. And the question of human worth was not going to be answered by showing them something that wasn't human. She had won the argument. She wasn't sure, standing at the edge of the vat now, watching the thing in the amber light tilt its head at the sound of her footsteps, whether winning had been the right outcome. "Hello," she said. She felt stupid saying it. She said it anyway. The creature turned toward her. Its face had been the subject of another 18-month argument, and the compromise they had landed on was something that haunted her. It was human enough to read, alien enough to unsettle. The jaw was slightly wider than human proportion. The eyes were the silver gray of hegemony optical tissue, capable of spectrum perception well beyond human range. But the forehead, the brow, the fundamental structure of the face, those were drawn from the Vitruvian templates that had been the project's founding document. They had argued about whether to give it a name. They had not reached a conclusion. "Can you understand me?" Voss asked. The creature looked at her. Its hands, hanging at its sides in the amber fluid, opened and closed once. Not a fist, just fingers spreading, then returning, like it was testing the sensation. "We built you to speak," Voss said. "Your language centers are. We gave you everything. You should be able to." The creature opened its mouth. What came out was not a word. It was something between a frequency and a tone, something that Voss felt in her back teeth before she heard it with her ears. She took an involuntary step back. Then it tried again, and this time it was recognizable. A distorted, over-resonant approximation of her name, Voss. It had been reading the team's communications through the audio feed. It had been listening for hours before any of them knew it was awake. Voss stood at the edge of the vat for a long time without speaking. She was thinking about her mother's mushrooms, the way they grew in the dark, in warmth, in careful silence, and how you could not rush them, and how, when they came up all at once, and there was nothing to do then but harvest. "Yes," she said finally. "That's right. They called it the construct in official documentation. The team called it other things in private, some reverent, some frightened, a few that Voss discouraged when she heard them. She did not assign it a name herself. She told herself this was a scientific discipline. She did not entirely believe herself. In the first 18 hours after it spoke, the construct learned everything the laboratory's shared network contained. Not hacked. It had been given access as part of the awakening protocol, the assumption being that it would require months of careful integration before it could process complex information. It required 18 hours. It read every scientific paper in the database. It read the engineering schematics for its own body. It read the hegemony assessment terms and the UN Security Council's response, and 600 years of human military history, and the complete published works of a novelist named Ursula Le Guin that O.C. had on his personal drive and had not expected anyone else to ever look at. On the morning of the second day, it asked Voss a question. "You made me to face them," it said. Its speech was improving rapidly. The resonance was still there, but it had learned to modulate it, to bring it down to a frequency that didn't rattle teeth. "The hegemony." "Yes," Voss said. "As a weapon. As a demonstration." She had rehearsed this answer. "You're proof that humanity can produce something equivalent to their biology. That we have value beyond. You made me to survive what they would do to a human soldier," the construct said. "That is a weapon." Voss was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "That's also true." The construct looked at her for a long time with its silver gray eyes. Then it said, "The novelist, Le Guin. I saw you'd read her. She wrote that the only thing that makes a man is the choice he makes." A pause. "I am wondering whether you considered that when you designed my architecture." Voss had not slept. She was running on pharmaceutical assistance and fear, and she did not have a good answer to this. She said, "We gave you language. We gave you the capacity to reason. We gave you, I know it sounds insufficient, but we gave you what we could. You gave me your biology," the construct said. "And their biology. You gave me the worst of both, optimized." "We gave you the best of both," Voss said. "Did you?" It wasn't a question. Metz found her in the observation gallery at 0300, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and a cold cup of coffee balanced on her knee. He sat down next to her without being invited. "It's asking the team questions," he said. "I know. Good questions." O.C. says it asked him what he loves most. He didn't know what to say. What did he say? His daughter. Metz was quiet for a moment. It asked Pallavi what she was afraid of. She said losing the people she loves. It said he stopped. What did it say? It said it understood the mechanism of grief already, from the biological templates, but it didn't understand why you would build a species that could feel it at all. He paused. She cried, Pahlavi. I've worked with her for 6 years. I've never seen her cry. Voss thought about this. She wrapped both hands around her cold coffee and stared at the ceiling. Do you think we made a mistake? Metz asked. I think, Voss said slowly, that we made something real. And I don't know what that means. The generals are going to want to deploy it in 72 hours regardless. I know. It might not be ready. It's already more ready than we are, Voss said. That's what frightens me. The hegemony fleet arrived 2 hours ahead of schedule, which the military analysts said was either a logistical adjustment or a deliberate psychological maneuver, and command responded to this ambiguity by doing nothing while analysts argued. By the time the fleet had settled into assessment orbit above the northern hemisphere, the arguing was over and the doing nothing had achieved the status of policy. The hegemony's lead vessel broadcast on all standard frequencies. The assessment deadline had been reached. Demonstrate your value. You have 6 standard hours. Voss was in the laboratory when the broadcast came through. She was sitting across a table from the construct, which had been taken out of the vat and clothed. A practical decision. Its cellular surface had finished integrating, and the amber fluid was no longer necessary, and was now wearing a borrowed jacket that was too short in the arms, and sitting with its hands flat on the table, studying her. You heard, she said. Yes, the deployment plan. I know the deployment plan, the construct said. I read it 3 days ago. Then you know that Command intends to present you to the Hegemony Assessment Team as evidence of human biological capacity. You will be examined. Your cellular architecture will be analyzed. The goal is to demonstrate that humans can produce something equivalent to their own biology. The construct's silver eyes didn't move from her face, so that we are useful to them, so that they spare us, so that they recognize our capacity for survival, the construct said. You want to show them we are worth keeping. It paused. This is the entire plan. It is, and if they decide we are not worth keeping. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of things Voss had not let herself think about directly. The 600 years of human military history the construct had read in 18 hours. The casualty projections. The 7 billion people on the planet below who did not know there was a thing in a laboratory in orbit that their governments had built and were now preparing to display like a card at a negotiating table. Then we fight, Voss said. With me, with whatever we have. The construct was quiet for a moment. Then it said, You're afraid. Yes, of the hegemony. Yes, and of you. She met its eyes. And of what I made. Of whether I understood the implications well enough. Of whether the ethics review I signed off on was adequate. Yes, I'm afraid of a great many things. The construct looked at her for a long time. Something shifted in its face. Not a human expression exactly, but close enough to one that she could read it as deliberation. Harlan Metz is afraid that his work will be misused, it said finally. Osi is afraid he won't see his daughter grow up. Pahlavi is afraid she has contributed to something she can't take back. You are afraid you have created something you don't understand and can't control. A pause. I have read 600 years of human history. Humans are afraid of everything. It seems to be the primary condition of the species. I suppose that's true, Voss said. And yet, the construct said, you built this laboratory. You did the work. You stayed awake for 41 hours because there was something you needed to understand, and you were not willing to stop until you understood it. It tilted its head. That slow listening gesture she had first seen through the viewport. Humans are afraid of everything, and they do everything anyway. I have been trying to understand this. I think it may be the most important thing about you. Voss looked at it. She thought about her mother's mushroom farm. The dark, the warmth, the careful silence, the way they came up all at once. Are you afraid? She asked. The construct's hands, flat on the table, opened and closed once, like fingers testing sensation. I don't know yet, it said. I will tell you when I find out. The assessment shuttle was Hegemony Construction, a needle-shaped thing in silver black that landed on the station's secondary bay with a precision that spoke of casual contempt for human engineering tolerances. 6 Hegemony soldiers came through the airlock first. They were tall, wider in the chest than human proportion, their exterior surface the same slightly iridescent gray-blue as deep water. They moved with a particular economy of things that had never been afraid of being hurt. Behind them came the assessors, three beings whose function in the hegemony hierarchy Voss had spent years trying to understand and still didn't, not really. They were smaller than the soldiers, and they carried no weapons, and they moved with something that might have been patience or might have been absolute certainty. The lead assessor looked at Voss. It did not speak. Instead, it transmitted a burst of compressed data through the station's comm system that her earpiece rendered as a synthetic voice. "You have something to show us?" "Yes," she said. "Then show us." She stepped aside. The construct walked into the bay. The hegemony soldier's response was immediate and involuntary, a shift in stance, a tightening of posture, the particular readiness of things that had just identified a potential threat. The assessors didn't move. They looked. The construct stood in the center of the bay and looked back. It was wearing the borrowed jacket. It had done nothing to make itself more impressive for this moment, and Voss had, after a long argument with herself, decided not to ask it to. It looked like what it was, something assembled, something composite, something that did not entirely fit in the world it had been made for. But it stood without apology for any of that, and its silver-gray eyes moved across the assessors with an attention that was unmistakably scientific. It was examining them. The lead assessor transmitted again. "This is your demonstration." "Yes," Voss said. "It is biological." "Yes, synthesized, built from a human structural template and hegemony cellular architecture. Full regenerative capacity. Immune cascade equivalent to your standard military grade. Nervous system integration. We see what it is," the assessor said. A pause, longer than the others. "We are reading its cellular signature. This is genuine hegemony architecture. Reproduced, yes. From what source? 14 years of xenobiological research. Public access hegemony medical data from first contact. And some material," Voss paused. "Some material we recovered from previous assessment teams who did not return." The assessors conferred in a frequency range her earpiece couldn't decode. The soldiers had not relaxed. The construct watched the assessors confer. Then it spoke. "You're wondering," it said, in hegemony standard, which it had learned from a first contact archive in 18 hours, "whether I represent a military threat, whether humans could produce enough of me to constitute a challenge to your fleet, whether the more practical response is immediate escalation rather than continued assessment." The lead assessor turned back toward it. "Yes," it transmitted. "I can tell you the answer," the construct said. "No. 14 years of work produced one of me. The resources required cannot be replicated at scale in any time frame relevant to your military planning. I am not a weapon. I am an argument." It paused. "I am humanity's argument that they understand life well enough to deserve to continue living." Silence in the bay. "And do they?" the assessor said. Not quite a question. The construct was quiet for a moment. Voss watched its face and could not read what was happening there. "I have existed for 3 days, the construct said. In those 3 days, I have read 600 years of their history. I have spoken with the people who built me. I have been asked what I love and what I fear before I understood whether I was capable of either." It paused. "They made me from what they knew of you. The parts of you that do not break, that regenerate, that persist. They use those parts because they admired them. But when they talk to each other, when they don't know I'm listening, they don't talk about persistence. They talk about their children. They talk about what they love. They pass food to each other, and they tell bad jokes. And one of them listened to the same piece of music 3 times in one night because it made him feel less afraid." Another silence. "Humans are afraid of everything," the construct said, "and they do everything anyway. They built me in 3 months with a deadline over their heads and a fleet in their sky. And when they brought me out of the vat, the first thing they asked was whether I could understand them." It looked at the lead assessor with its silver-gray eyes. "That is not the behavior of a species optimized for survival. That is the behavior of a species that believes survival is worth something. That believes the universe is better for being understood than for being conquered. I am made from your biology, but I am made by them. And I think," a pause, something deliberate in it, something chosen, "I think that is the more important fact." The lead assessor did not respond immediately. The silence stretched long enough that Voss became aware of her own heartbeat. "You speak for them," the assessor said at last. "I speak with them," the construct said. "That is different." The conference lasted 4 hours. Voss was present for all of it, standing against the wall of the briefing room while the construct and the lead assessor conducted a conversation that moved through 11 languages and 2 frequency ranges. and touched on questions of philosophy and biology and the nature of Earth in a fashion that left Voss feeling that she had been present at something and would spend the rest of her life trying to describe it. She watched the construct. She watched it navigate the assessor's questions with a precision that was genuinely hegemony. The biological intelligence they had built into it, the processing capacity, the deep reading, and answer with something that was genuinely not quite human, she thought, but made by humans, and carrying all of that in the way it spoke, in what it chose to address, and what it chose to return to, in the moments when it paused because the question deserved the pause. Metz appeared at her shoulder at hour 3. "How's it going?" he murmured. "I don't know," she said. "That bad?" "I don't know," she said again. "I genuinely don't know." At hour 4, the lead assessor transmitted a summary. The hegemony would continue the assessment. The fleet would remain in orbit for a further 30 days. During that period, a formal scientific exchange would be established, hegemony researchers and human researchers working in parallel, addressing questions of mutual interest. At the end of 30 days, the Hegemony Council would convene a full review. It was not a reprieve. It was not a guarantee. It was 30 days, and a table with both sides sitting at it, which was approximately 29.5 days, more than Voss had expected when the fleet first appeared on long-range sensors. The assessors returned to their shuttle. The soldiers followed. The needle-shaped vessel lifted from the bay with the same casual precision as before, and then it was gone. Voss stood in the empty bay for a long time. The construct came to stand beside her. They both looked at the closed airlock. "What happens now?" Voss said. 30 days, the construct said. And then it continues." It looked at the airlock. "That is what I told them, that humans continue. That is what the history shows. Not that they succeed. They fail constantly. They fail at tremendous scale. The record is quite clear on this. But they continue. They build the next thing. They ask the next question. They pass the food around and tell the bad joke, and someone listens to the music again." A pause. "I told them that a species which does that has already answered the question of its own worth. It answers it every day without realizing." Voss looked at the creature beside her. In the bay's cold light, the borrowed jacket, the silver-gray eyes, the face that was almost but not entirely human. 3 days old and already speaking for 8 billion people to the only other civilization humanity had ever encountered. "Are you afraid?" she asked. She had asked before. She was asking again. The construct's hands opened and closed. A slow, deliberate movement, fingers spreading and returning, like testing sensation for the first time. "Yes," it said. "Of what?" It was quiet for a moment. When it answered, its voice had lost the last traces of the resonant alien frequency. It sounded for the first time like something that had learned language from the people around it. "That I won't be enough," it said. "That I won't be what you need. That I will face something I cannot understand, and I will fail you." A pause. "The same things you are afraid of." Voss looked at it. She thought about that, about the specific shape of that fear, about how strange it was to hear your own terror stated back to you in a voice that was almost human. Then she did something she had not planned to do. She reached out and put her hand briefly on the construct's arm, the borrowed jacket, the arm inside it. The way you touch someone who is afraid, and you cannot fix the thing they are afraid of, but you want them to know you are there. The construct looked at her hand, then at her face. "Fis. My mother used to do that," Voss said, "when I was scared. What did it do?" "Nothing, really." She took her hand back. "But it helped anyway." The construct was quiet. "That is the part," it said finally, "that I don't think they will ever understand, that it helps anyway. That humans invented comfort for situations in which comfort is not logically adequate. That you knew it wouldn't fix anything, and you did it regardless." Its silver-gray eyes found hers. "That is not a biological capacity. I have their biology. I do not have that." A pause. "Not yet." Voss slept for 11 hours after the Hegemony shuttle left. Real sleep, pharmaceutical-free, the kind that arrives when the body has finally given up arguing and simply shuts down. She dreamed about the viewport glass, about her own handprint in the condensation, about watching something move that she had made, and not entirely understanding what she had done. When she woke up, Metz was in the doorway of the bunk room with 2 cups of coffee, actual coffee, hot, and an expression she couldn't read. "The construct asked for you," he said. She sat up. "Is something wrong?" "No." He handed her the coffee. It asked Osi about his daughter. He showed it photographs. It asked questions for about an hour. Then it asked if it could speak to you. Voss wrapped her hands around the coffee. "Hot. Real." "Harlan," she said. Yeah, did we do something good? Metz was quiet for a moment. He was a careful man, a good scientist because of it, and he didn't answer questions he hadn't thought through. I think, he said slowly, that we did something real. And I think real is harder than good and more important. And I think he stopped, tried again. I think it's going to tell us what it means if we let it. Voss drank her coffee. Through the bunk room walls she could hear, faintly, someone playing music. The same piece that Osei had listened to 3 times in one night because it made him feel less afraid. It sounded different now. It sounded like something you could stand up from. She stood up. The construct was in the laboratory when she found it, standing at the viewport where she had first seen it move, hands pressed flat against the cold polymer glass. Below, through the glass, the amber fluid of the empty vat caught the station's running lights and glowed faintly orange. You wanted to see me, Voss said. I was thinking, the construct said. It did not turn away from the glass. About the mirror, the film. I read about it, the Edison film. The creature sees itself in the mirror and is horrified. It cannot exist in the world that made it. It fades, a pause. I have been thinking about mirrors. Voss came to stand beside it. They both looked down at the empty vat. And, she said, I am made of 2 things that do not belong together, the construct said. Your biology and theirs, your history and their capacity. I am, it searched for the word, a seam, the place where 2 things are joined and the join is not clean. A pause. I looked in the hegemony assessors today, and I saw something they did not expect me to see. I saw the moment they recognized what I was, not what I contained biologically, what I was. Something they had made, reproduced in a form they had not sanctioned, made to speak and think and argue on behalf of a species they had written off. It turned from the glass and looked at her. They were afraid of me. Good, Voss said, before she could stop herself. The construct looked at her for a moment. Then something happened in its face that she had not seen before. Not a human expression, but something in the same direction. Yes, it said. Good. You're not going to fade, she said. No. It turned back to the glass. I am going to look in the mirror every day for 30 days, and I am going to learn to see myself clearly, what I am made of, what that means. A pause, and then I am going to tell them, whether they want to hear it or not. Below them, the amber fluid was still. The vat was empty. The thing it had made was standing at the viewport in a borrowed jacket, hands flat against the cold glass, pressing 5 fingers into the condensation. Voss looked at the handprint, then at the construct's face. Le Guin, she said. Yes? She also wrote that we are all, always beginners. The construct was quiet for a moment. I know, it said. I read it. 11 hours ago, when I first came to this window. A pause. I thought you might say that. Did it help? Its hands moved, fingers spreading, returning. The slow, deliberate gesture she had first seen through the glass, when it was still in the vat, still new, still learning what sensation meant. Yes, it said. It helped anyway. Outside the viewport, the hegemony fleet sat in orbit like a question that hadn't been answered yet. Inside the laboratory, a human scientist, and something that was almost but not entirely human, stood at a window and watched the light change on amber fluid and did not speak, because there was nothing left to say that the silence couldn't carry, and the silence was enough. The 30 days would come. The assessment would continue. The Hegemony Council would convene and ask their questions, and the construct would answer them in 11 languages and 2 frequency ranges, and with the full weight of 600 years of human history behind it. All the fear, all the failure, all the music listened to 3 times in the dark, all the hands pressed to glass, all the bad jokes, and the borrowed jackets and the photographs of daughters, shown to things that had no daughters and wanted to understand what having one meant. It would not be enough to guarantee safety. Nothing was ever enough to guarantee that. Humans had built civilization on this understanding, that enough was not a destination, that you worked toward it anyway, that you built the next thing and asked the next question and passed the food around and got back up. The construct had read this in 600 years of history. Now, standing at a viewport in orbit above a frightened blue planet, it was beginning to understand it. That was, Voss thought, the only thing she had ever really wanted to make.